I do love the old Western serials. Good to see they're making a comeback. The Mandalorian is a rousing serial adventure show in a series of films called The Star Wars. It followed a revival of the motion picture series, which reportedly started off on the right foot, then tripped dick first into a festering ditch and shat itself to death. But this is not what piqued my interest about The Mandalorian. Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. My name is Ayn Von Bonk, and as you've probably noticed, I have no face. It earned me a lot of nicknames in school. Johnny No Face, Featureless McGee, Spasticus, although that last one was probably about the wheelchair. My first thought in watching the show was, gosh, this must be how that representation everyone's going on about feels. And then it occurred to me, why do these faceless Khuleshov characters work so well? Why doesn't a character need a face? The Khuleshov Effect is a film editing technique that uses the juxtaposition and cut between two shots to imply meaning. Pioneered by Len Khuleshov in the 19-teens, it has become a staple of modern film grammar, so ingrained most of us don't consciously register it, seeing as we're so fluent in the language of film. Here to explain it is a portly man with the word cock in his name.
Now the third way is what one might call pure cinematics, the assembly of film, and how it can be changed to create a different idea. Now we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees, and he smiles. Now what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man. He's no longer the benign gentleman who loves babies. That's the difference. That's what film can do for you.
A Khuleshov character, by definition, is a faceless character, a blank slate onto which we interpret thoughts, motive, and even emotion, which goes some way to explaining Joseph Gordon-Levitt's career. Although the language of film is key in communicating the inner life of a faceless character to us, it's important to remember the Khuleshov effect is not just an editing technique, it is a storytelling technique. And it tells us that maybe the reason why we invest in fictional characters has nothing to do with the human face. Many an audience member, and several writers, make the mistake of confusing character with eccentricities. Talented as she was at plot, Agatha Christie seemed to think that all she needed to make a complex character was a love of puddings, the need to eat 2 identically sized eggs for breakfast, and a mustache. The most magnificent pair of moustaches in England. But this tells us nothing about who the character really is. Audiences often labour under the assumption that the actor is the sole conduit to the character they play, or the dialogue is what shows character, and although that's partly true, far too much emphasis is placed on the value of the spoken word as a character-building tool. The core element that we, as an audience, use to interpret character is action. Not this, but this. Characters can be liars, cowards, or snobs, but we know who they really are by seeing what choices they make. Mando presents himself to other characters as an amoral gun for hire, a man for which petty rules like morality don't get in the way of the job that needs to be done. But when forced into a position where he is expected to kill a child, he breaks those expectations and saves the life of the most adorable little frog spawn in the galaxy. Statements can be false. Only action speaks true. For example, it's easy to say my father and I should have had a healthy relationship, but oh so much harder to actually open up and talk to the man. I mean, he had no mouth. Luckily for me, mouths run on my mother's side of the family. When forced to make a choice that impacts us personally, our inner intentions are truly revealed. And that's how you make a mind reader out of an audience member. Even Aristotle had that one figured out 2,500 years ago.
Speech or action will possess character if it discloses the nature of a deliberate choice.
This is how all characters work, and why we have no trouble empathizing with a hero without a face. He doesn't need one. In a way, no characters do. It's why animated characters are no more difficult to empathize with than some actors I could mention. Emotion. Of course, there are many types of choice a character can make, which can tell us different things about said character. Checkmark choices. Picking either skimmed or full-fat milk doesn't tell you much about a character, but it can indicate they're self-conscious about their weight, for example. They are not high drama, but these low-stakes choices are a good way to establish character at the beginning of a story.
No droids.
And repeated later with a different choice can show change. A temperature check of sorts, a means to test who the character is before and after an impactful experience. Routine. One of the go-to screenplay techniques for establishing a character is to witness their morning routine. This is to establish a character's flaws or motivation that the story will later challenge and change. The habits we form say a lot about us, although what you can interpret from me waking up, having breakfast, brushing my teeth, and spending an hour screaming at an oil painting of my father can tell you about me, I don't know. The set piece. If action equals character, the same is true for action scenes, or set pieces as we call them. You'll see this said a lot by stunt choreographers, who also know that action cannot happen for its own sake. Action has to show character, and can be done without dialogue. So, in a way, this,
What I'm holding is very valuable.
actually tells you more about the characters than this. And if you're invested in writing a thrilling set piece of your own, make it a demonstration of who the people involved really are. Moral choices. These are big, story-defining moments that kick a narrative along and form the spine of a character's arc. Usually occurring as the climax of a particular act, we build up to a moment where the hero's flaw is challenged, and under immense pressure they make a definitive choice that changes them. Episode 1 establishes out-for-himself gunslinger Mando, and ends with him saving the target he was supposed to kill. Episode 3 reinforces his selfishness by having him return the child to his client, only to challenge him on his flaw, and climaxes with his triumphant return to save the little toad. This is how you create a character arc, with each act kicking the can further down the road, with each moral decision forcing him to make incremental positive change. A character is someone at war with themselves, their inner flaw and need for change duking it out back and forth until they come out better, or sometimes worse. And the only way we see this battle play out is in the choices that character makes and how each choice changes them. We're all in a state of change. For example, I haven't been the same since my father died. Yes, it's been a humbling experience these last 3 hours. Not a distraction I needed before we started filming, though. Writer and Liverpudlian Jimmy McGovern's work excels at this, constructing his narrative out of a series of moral choices the characters are forced into, based on his childhood experiences of the moral dilemmas given to him by the nuns in Jesuit school. His entire back catalogue is thoroughly worth checking out. Please do give it a watch. Actions can tell us who a character is, but we don't begin to fully empathize with them until we understand why they make the choices they do. Characters who undergo an arc need two things. Firstly, a want, some sort of goal they actively pursue that ignores or indulges their central flaw, and a need, something that will challenge their central flaw, a change that we as the audience know they need. We all have our own wants, our own goals, like successfully presenting this video to prove my own worth and distract from the gnawing void inside of me I otherwise fill with high-tar cigarettes and low-bar whiskey. Our swarthy tin-plated gunslinger wants to forego human interaction and pursue a life of rugged independence without being exposed to the vulnerability of people seeing him for who he really is. Yes, ladies, MBs and gentlemen, that mask is what we in the industry call a visual metaphor. Of course, what he needs is to embrace responsibility for another person in his life, and sharing that responsibility with a roster of friends and comrades. A family, if you will.
It's about family, and that's what's so powerful about it.
It's easy for many an amateur to confuse the two, but understanding this dynamic is key to writing any main character, especially faceless ones. Of course, an audience won't empathize with these conflicting desires unless they understand the why, or motive as we call it. A compelling, understandable reason why a character may pursue toxic, self-defeating behavior. Say, if your chrome cowboy wants to lead an amoral, isolated life, perhaps sneak in a little backstory about how his people are being constantly hunted down, forcing them to lead lonely, isolated lives. And if he needs to learn to be vulnerable in front of others, the best motivation may be a vulnerable little tadpole, who, like your hero, is a foundling orphan who can't fend for himself and is also so cute you want to squeeze him until he dies. Side note, if you really want to add on the pressure in the back half of your story, make the person he needs to open up to someone he viscerally hates. A droid, say. A hatred you could justify with a backstory about your hero's parents being murdered by droids. We would call this technique the wound. A traumatic event in a character's past that forges and motivates their core flaw. A writing technique like the wound, or the ghost as John Truby calls it, speaks to the nature of how memories, especially traumatic ones, influence our behaviour. I mean, we've all had that moment where we've been wrongly accused of shoplifting, and our father is just standing there, not saying anything, unable to say anything as the hysterical manager calls the police, who barge in and drag us away, and our father is just there, faceless, voiceless, impotent, unable to stem the unyielding tide of panic and horror that still wakes us up in the middle of the night sometimes. We've all had that, right? As you can see, a character's flaw tends to be motivated by the past, but positive change tends to be motivated by events in the present. We only follow characters we empathize with, and we only empathize with characters when we understand why they take the actions they take, faceless or otherwise, which can present some problems in certain other mediums. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why video game characters for the most part do not work. Because of the differing mechanics of video games, they are left with a big fat paradox right at the heart of characterization. The video game industry tends to flip-flop between two types of characterization. Either they create a faceless character that the audience projects themselves onto, or aggressively infuse a character with as much personality as possible. Of course, neither work particularly well because you, as the player, control their actions throughout the game. They become an imperfect conduit through which you make decisions instead of a human being you can observe taking action and interpret their character through that. One of the most egregious examples of which would be Master Chief from Halo, a series made by people who loved Starship Troopers and didn't realize it was satire.
One day, someone like me is gonna kill you and your whole race.
He is a hero with a mask and no face, a title and no name, at least at first. Perhaps the most explicitly blank slate character to headline a popular series. As a result, he has too much backstory to be a true audience avatar, and not enough character for an audience to empathize with. Helmeted though he and Mando are, one is a character we follow, and the other is a piece of art design.
I'm from Buenos Aires, and I say kill them all!
All actions tell you something about a character, although why my mother thinks my decisions on father's funeral arrangements reflect so badly on me, I have no idea. I don't know why mother is insisting on an open casket funeral. I mean, he has no face. What is there to see? I could get the mortician to draw a smiley face on him, I suppose. Charlie Brooker, writer of Black Mirror, started out as a game reviewer for PC Zone in the 90s and understands this paradox of choice and character in video games. So, when he came to write a choose-your-own-adventure episode of Black Mirror called Bandersnatch, he innovated a solution. Over the course of the story, the main character of Stefan begins to slowly realize that you, the viewer, are forcing him to make choices in the narrative, a control he continually tries to break. By drawing clear lines between his character and you, Stefan retains his agency and allows us to empathize with him as a distinct character and not a puppet. The video game industry is yet to really recognize this as a fundamental paradox in the medium, and continually just doubles down on making, essentially, 60-hour movies with little or no innovation at all. There are some genuinely innovative video games coming out of the independent crowd, however. The Outer Wilds, for example, refuses to characterize the player character at all, instead writing a dense, interconnected story that you can discover in any order and piece together yourself. A breakthrough writing technique for video games that puts player agency first. Not to mention the fact that BioShock in and of itself is a meta-commentary on the illusion of choice. A different medium requires a different form of storytelling. As long as we write video games like movies, the art form will never come into its own. Many make the mistake of thinking likability is key to a main character, and although it isn't a deal breaker, it is in no way necessary. There's a glut of fine films about what I believe the kids nowadays call raging assholes. Main characters that are unequivocally evil. We do not need likability to follow a main character. We do not need sympathy. Their inborn nature, nor their upbringing, needs to reflect ours. All a main character has to be is empathetic. Raging asshole characters work because our biggest inroad to empathy is to see our own flaws and ambitions, however toxic, on display in someone else. Although few of us have ever built an oil empire, run for political office, or let a friend die for personal gain, we can recognize ambition, that yearning for success in the people we may have to tread on to achieve them. Within a toxic hero, we are forced to reflect on our own desires and goals, and question what they are worth, or even if we should hold on to them at all. Our capacity for empathy is surprisingly deep, and we will follow a character we empathize with, however dark that journey is. So, once you have a fully rounded, fleshed out character, your instinct might be to drop them on the plate for all to see. But a great writer always resists the temptation. Characters are not static things, they're in motion, undergoing an arc of change, but even then, qualities like motive, want, need, or wounds are never presented all at once. They are drip-fed, slowly, to an audience, over the course of the story. Mystery is an important part of engagement in fiction and in life. Is that character malicious or self-destructive? Why are they hiding their identity? And if my father couldn't talk, how do I know he ever truly loved me? The difference between real life and movies is that movies can actually answer these questions. And an audience must always be asking questions. They want to know what a hero's motive is, what happened to them to make them like this, and what their plan is. And a patient writer slowly eases answers to a curious audience, right after making them ask another question, stringing them along on their investment in the mystery. Films like Eastern Promises, for example, end on a reveal of who that character was this whole time. And it makes sense because twists like these are usually a matter of motive. We've seen their actions this whole time. We thought we knew the motivation, but now we understand a deeper one. At the end of the day, only the storyteller truly knows what has always been lurking beneath the mask. And it can actually be tremendous fun to drip-feed the truth to an audience over the entire length of a story. At the end of the day, it's actions that define character, be it saving a little green tadpole, taking off a mask, or giving me a hug after a traumatic experience, teaching me to ride a bike, teaching me to ride a wheelchair after the biking accident, or choosing to have an open casket funeral, just like Mother wanted. Ultimately, I suppose, we're all faceless. It's the actions we take that define who we really are, fictional or otherwise. Yes? Yes. Thank you. Okay, so Mother died. Emotion.